And so I wrote this thing, and I kind of said, well, housing has an exchange value, housing has a use value. And the bit of the problem in Baltimore is that when you look at how housing is provided, you're looking to the market system to provide housing, and therefore the exchange value is something which is going to have to be orchestrated in such a way that it is profitable for people to rent housing or buy and sell housing, and people have to have the money to do that. So the exchange value aspect of housing is terribly important. And then you can start to say, well, housing has a set of use values, and you can go through those. It's shelter, it's privacy, it's a place of sociality, it's very often a protected space. So you could talk at length about the use value of housing, and then kind of say, well, the problem in Baltimore is that the provision of housing is orchestrated through the exchange value, and it is not able to deliver the necessary use values for housing to the mass of the population to allow for, if you like, a stable social and political and economic situation. So this was, if you like, the sort of argument I started out with. And it was so, it was a bit like me taking the first few pages of Capital and projecting them into the study in this way. Well, I didn't mention Capital, of course, knowing full well the anti-Marxism and the anti-communism of everybody. So I didn't say a word where it was all coming from. I just used the concepts and laid out an analysis of the Baltimore housing market around the theme of use value, exchange value, and problems in the exchange value system, which were generating difficulties in terms of the use value of housing to the mass of the population. Everybody around the table thought this was a fantastic way to look at it. You know, I kind of said, "Yeah, this is a really interesting way to look at things." And one of the people who had been part of been one of the landlords who'd participated in an economic study, who kind of said, they came down from Penn and they had this big study of our functioning, and it was a really total waste of time. It was all about supply and demand and all those kinds of things, and that's all nonsense. But this idea, you can study this whole thing through the categories of use value and exchange value. That's a great way to do it. And then you kind of talk about, and the way you systematized the exchange value system and showed how it therefore did not work at all well in terms of was great. So there we were, and there were the bankers and people from the FHA and the landlords and so on, absolutely loving this use value, exchange value framework which I had set up, which was, of course, page one of Marx's Capital. And I felt like saying to them, do you realize this is page one of Marx's Capital? And I realized what a disaster it would have been had I done so. But for me personally, I was only on page one of Capital, really. And I found it, therefore, so interesting that the framework that Marx sets up for Capital, it provided such an intuitively interesting and fascinating way in which to approach a social problem. As long as you didn't say it had anything to do with Marx, you could really get away with it. I started to have much more confidence in the Marxian theory because the categories, when they were put to work in a situation of this kind, made so much sense to all of the people participating in the system, and they could see that it was making sense. So one of the things I then did was to say, well, if I can get this from page one of Capital, maybe I should go on to page 40 or something and find out what else I can get out of Capital, and that set me off with a great deal of confidence in exploring Marx's framework.